Permits for oil and gas drilling on federal land have tripled in the last 10 years. This has expanded the wildland-urban interface into a more industrial environment. It is full of infrastructure that is a mystery to most wildland firefighters. We're talking about toxic gases that you may not be able to see or smell, pumping equipment pushing volatile substances in pipelines above and below ground, tanks and ponds full of liquid you only know by interpreting signs and placards. With all of this come poorly developed roads and high volumes of traffic. With that said, it's not hard to predict that many of you will encounter hazards in the industrial interface. In this video, we will talk about three things: the situation regarding the industrial interface, recognition of the hazards and how to avoid exposure, and guidance on how to know if you've been exposed, and if you think you have, what to do about it. To do this, we've enlisted the help of two experts, Tony Badia and Dave Bott. Tony is a wildland fire safety specialist at the National Interagency Fire Center. Dave is a fire operations specialist from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Biggest thing that we would call the industrial interface right now might be the oil and gas industry. Over the last several years, the industrial interface has gained more notoriety just for the fact that, like say, with the increased use of and need for oil and the dependence on drilling and things of that nature.
Research done by Tony reveals over 100 references to hydrogen cyanide gas in incident status summaries.
What I found was over the course of about 3 years, in the remarks section, there had been like over 100 references to hydrogen cyanide gas, and that could have been to the gas exposures themselves. It could have dealt with also underground piping that either was struck by heavy equipment or firefighters. Also, just the other issues associated with the oil and gas industry, as far as the piping, the pumping stations, and also vehicles. So it's pretty widespread. And the thing I found interesting was it wasn't in a geographic area. It was all across the United States.
Probably one of the biggest industrial things we've got going is oil and gas in New Mexico, and probably the biggest hazard we have with that program is the H2S gas issue, which is a byproduct of the oil and gas industry.
As we continue to move, into this new industrial interface, it's always been part of the wildland, but I think that right now with, like say, the increased activity with oil and gas industry.
5 years ago, there were less well sites out there. In recent years, they have doubled the number of well sites that we have, so we have a lot more infrastructure in place. One of the indicators on federal well sites is there's a small windsock, like a helicopter windsock, that's required, but not all sites have those. But if you see one of those, that's there because of the H2S concentrations. We have a prepared document that we give them. A lot of times it includes a map of where the H2S sites are, but to give them a good, thorough briefing on the H2S gas issue.
Let's say there are two kinds of briefings, an in-briefing and an operational briefing. When done properly, crews that are new to the area will get a general briefing related to the local hazards. The operational briefing should cover the specific hazards they face on the incident. The briefing checklist in the IRPG will help you to remember to address these considerations.
It's incumbent upon the incident commander to provide a good briefing to address the hazards and in the industrial interface.
What process do I want my crew to use when faced with the many hazards in the industrial interface?
Standard operating procedures and your hazard and risk management at the local level are incredibly important to understand and to share with your firefighters coming in from out of the area.
Standard operating procedures set the standards for basic crew operations. SOPs aren't meant to limit your ability to make decisions. In fact, if developed properly, SOPs will provide a great deal of flexibility in the decision-making process. If you need guidance to develop your SOPs, take a look at the Red Book or your agency equivalent.
The Blue Book for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Red Book for the other wildland fire agencies. So we have some specific protocol that's associated with the oil and gas industry.
Be aware that the industrial interface is not just limited to oil and gas wells. It may include power lines, mine shafts, open pit mining, and dumping areas. Of course, only you will have the knowledge specific to your area.
Don't know, you need to ask, and I think that's probably the biggest point for firefighters. What do I need to do to protect myself and the individuals that I'm with?
We have the petroleum technicians who are specialists in this area, and that's usually if we've got something in one of these areas that has the marking on the map that it's a high concentration, that will get the petroleum technicians to come out and be right there on scene with the crews.
The thing that happens with this hydrogen cyanide exposure, lots of times firefighters don't realize that the difference between being exposed to carbon monoxide poisoning and hydrogen cyanide poisoning. Typical burning of the forest, we're talking about 8,000 BTUs per pound for wood fiber, things like that. But with these new chemicals and synthetics that are out there, these BTUs are going up to 12 and 15,000 BTUs per pound, which creates a whole different level of exposure just for the fact that the smoke it's a lot hotter fire behavior wise. The smoke is a lot more toxic.
In southern New Mexico, the black plastic lines go out across the wildland from the well site to a tank up on a hill. Sometimes they're along parallel to the road. And that. Generally, they don't burn unless there's a concentration of vegetation or something up against the line. But when they do melt through, we really never know what's in the plastic lines, and then the toxic smoke that they put off and that. So we try to stay clear of those lines, and if they're burning, we don't suppress that portion. We have to have the oil workers come in and shut them down and let them go out naturally.
How do you know if you've been exposed? In many cases, you can't see it, smell it, or taste it. And if you are exposed, what should you do?
A great example of being exposed to something and maybe not know it might be exposure to hydrogen cyanide gas.
Precautions should always be taken when working around industrial infrastructure. For example, staying upwind when possible or staying out of low-lying areas. You definitely don't want to wait until you smell something or see something that makes you suspect a possible hazardous exposure.
The H2S gas is heavier, and it settles down in the low ravines and low-lying areas around the rigs.
It's important to remember that exposure can occur through inhalation, ingestion, or absorption. A valuable tool for the recognition of hazardous gases is the 4-gas monitor.
One of the key things, we have monitors in our engines, our vehicles that we drive out to the fires. We have 4-gas monitors that'll tell us, and H2S is one of the main gases we monitor.
Whether you detect an exposure through your senses or a gas monitor, your actions should be the same.
If you don't know what it is, then avoid it. If you see something that you're not familiar with, try and stay upwind from the exposure. Contact local experts that can help you determine what it is and deal with the hazard before you continue on with your suppression activities. If your monitor goes off, you should already have that predetermined in your initial briefing and what your expectations are for your crew. Or as an individual. If you think that you've been exposed to hydrogen cyanide gas or something of that nature, it's imperative that you get to a local emergency care facility that has the appropriate level of training and knowledge to understand what is associated with hydrogen sulfide gas and hydrogen cyanide, so that they can take care of those issues accordingly. A great example of planning ahead for if you know you have oil and gas, or you have dump sites or open pit mining and things of that nature. This might be a good time for early season to document those on a map, plan what you're going to do, contact your local healthcare facility, see what kind of resources they have available to deal with these exposures if you do have them, so that you can plan ahead accordingly, and if not, then continue on to a higher level trauma center and things of that nature.